Operates. And I want to turn now to David Otto. He's in Abuja, Nigeria. He is the director of the Geneva Center for Africa, Security, and Strategic Studies. And I thank you for joining us now on what really have been stunning developments in Niger. And given all the uncertainty that we see there now, how does Wagner's presence and motives throughout the region further complicate the situation?
Well, of course, we know that Wagner has a strategy, and that includes pouncing on any opportunities, that it gets, to, take advantage of the chaos. What they've done in Central African Republic is no different from the same activities that they've done in Mali, in Burkina Faso. So at this point in time, with the words of, if going to Pugvin, what they are essentially saying is that, they're possibly calling for the military junta to, rely on Wagner. This is a private military contractor that specializes on providing regime security, not national security. So perhaps, what we're going to see is that, Wagner perhaps will want to expand by providing perhaps the military junta with options, which, will further encroach on the democratic process, which Niger Republic had faced for the first time in its history, to see a democratically elected, process, just in 2021. So it's a very concerning, scenario, and I hope that the meetings which have been held by ECOWAS, which is the regional body, but also African Union, will find some kind of a solution to pressure the junta to give back perhaps, power to a democratically elected government, or perhaps to have a transitional government. Go ahead.
Yeah, and those meetings continue, and we'll see what comes out of them in the coming hours. But to continue this, striking information that you give us, help us better understand how the attempted mutiny by Wagner's leader last month in Russia could now affect how Wagner tries to operate going forward in Africa. I mean, those comments from Prigozhin were so out of place, really, because he was speaking as if he was a leader of a country with a military prepared to launch a military intervention there.
Well, I think, we all thought that, Yevgeny Prigozhin had been exiled to Belarus. And it was some kind of a good news that we would see the end of Wagner. But essentially, we keep seeing him, appearing and talking about official positions, of this nature. Perhaps, what I would have expected in the African-Russian summit was to see African leaders putting a lot of pressure on Russia and Vladimir Putin to discontinue the use of private military contractors, whom, as I said, they are much more focused on regime security than national security. But I don't know how, this is, going to go forward, because, of course, the Russian president has made it clear that, he would kind of integrate Wagner forces into his regular forces. But we haven't seen the same structure being applied to African countries. And I think this is where Africa needs to be very careful, considering the fact that Wagner has the ability to turn against its owner, in the sense of Russia. We do not know if they can do the same thing in these African countries. So, Africa needs stability. They have the leverage, and I think they should use it better in terms of how they apply this to their partners and how they apply this to their national security.
And yet Wagner has already, shown in Africa that it's been able to fill that power vacuum and, in fact, enrich itself as well. How does Wagner's presence in Africa, now seeming growing presence there, really complicate things for Western allies when they're trying to stabilize some of those countries?
Of course, it will. I mean, we're talking about geopolitics here. I mean, this is a plausible deniability for Russia. What Wagner would possibly do in this particular situation. I mean, let's talk about Niger, for example, that has a huge U.S. presence. It has a huge presence of French troops and German troops that are stationed in Niger Republic. Niger was the last bastion of democracy that some of the Western countries like France and the United States relied upon, especially when we saw some of the troops from Operation Barkhane that left Mali into Niger Republic and Burkina Faso. They went to Niger. Now what we're seeing is this narrative of an Western and anti-French demonstration. And perhaps, we've seen also that some of the protesters are, kind of calling on Russia to intervene. So it's going to cause a further chaos, and it complicates matter for regional bodies like the African Union and ECOWAS on how to apply sanctions, against this regime. But I have to add that some of the things that ECOWAS needs to do is to try and ensure that governments do not change constitution. We do not have constitutional coups. In one of the Central African countries, CAR, which Wagner operates, there is an ongoing referendum as we speak, where the president, who is being guided by Wagner, is changing the constitution to run for a third term. This is the kind of chaos that I think African countries should avoid.
Understood, and a fine point that you make there, given the meddling in that constitution. David Otto for us, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.